Merchants, livestock, caravans from all walks. And I thought Anbar's markets were disorderly.
Where there is disorder, there is chaos, and chaos can bring opportunity. See what avenues present themselves. Be reactive, but patient, and trust your instincts.
Caravanserai. The Caravanserai was a palace, sarai in Persian, for groups of people, caravan. More roadside inn than palace, it offered a safe place and varying levels of comfort to merchants, pilgrims, and travelers recovering after a day's journey along the empire's roads. Caravanserais were commonly constructed by the caliphs, their relatives, and members of the local elite to display their piety and generosity. Hundreds of them dotted the empire, especially its Iranian-Iraqi core. They were built about 30 kilometers apart, the distance a man and his pack animal could be expected to travel each day. In them, travelers could find safety for the night, exchange goods, and share news and pay taxes to ensure the maintenance of the facility. No two caravanserais were alike. Even if most of them featured a large courtyard surrounded by a wall, both their physical appearance and available facilities varied widely from one to the other. In plains and deserts, the courtyard would be open and the walls made of dried brick, while in the mountains, a fully roofed area would keep out rain and snow. The most well-appointed had a cistern, stables, a prayer space, guards, and room for guests. But most were simple roofed galleries without any of these niceties. While no caravanserai survive from this period, the so-called desert palaces of the Umayyads, like Qasir al-Hayr al-Shakiri, may have fulfilled a similar role.
Keep at it.
Camels. While camels are a mandatory cliché of any depiction of the Islamic world, the so-called desert ships have long been not only an iconic but also a crucial means of transport across Eurasia. Camels were already a well-known method of travel during antiquity, used from Morocco to China. Their wide padded feet helped them keep their balance on any path, while their fatty humps provided them with energy in regions where food was scarce. Moreover, the camels could eat almost any plant, even thorny ones, and turn them into milk or meat for hungry caravanners. They also showed great resistance to extreme temperatures, with dromedaries, one hump, more desert-resistant, and Bactrian camels, 2 humps, more tolerant to the cold and high altitudes. They could carry much heavier loads than horses or donkeys, making them perfect pack animals. Their efficiency and flexibility had a clear effect on the economic wealth of the Abbasid Empire, boosting its trade and facilitating travels all across its huge expanse. They were also useful in warfare, as they could run surprisingly fast. The preferential use of camels had important consequences on the landscape and the city planning of the empire. Caliphs did not need to maintain an extensive paved road network, as camels did not need one. Since camels made wheeled carts virtually unnecessary, Abbasid cities could also maintain narrower roads. The tall buildings that lined these narrow roads kept the city in shade, meaning that the ambient temperature inside cities was several degrees lower than in the surrounding open areas. Dur-Kurigalzu. On the outskirts of Baghdad stands what looks at first sight like a hill battered by the winds. On closer inspection, however, the mound is made of baked bricks, which form a 60-meter-high structure. According to an inscription found on one of them, they were placed by King Kurigalzu II in the 14th century BCE. It is the last standing building of the former capital of the Kassite Empire, Dur-Kurigalzu, the fortress of Kurigalzu. The Kassites ruled over central and southern Mesopotamia, Iraq, from the 16th to the 12th century BCE. While their precise origins are uncertain, they adopted many of the cultural and political practices of their Babylonian predecessors. Amongst them was the construction of ziggurats, terraced compounds made of receding levels that served as temples. In Dur-Kurigalzu, this took the form of a 69 by 67 meter building, of which only the core survives. Around it were a royal palace and an entire city, both of which were destroyed by the Elamites of southeastern Iran around 1155 BCE. The ziggurat served as a temple for centuries, but it too was eventually abandoned. Devoured by time and sand, it nonetheless remains one of the most iconic buildings of the area, often confused with the biblical Tower of Babel by medieval and early modern travelers. Zubida bint Jafar. Zubida bint Jafar, daughter of Jafar, was one of the most famous of the Abbasid princesses. Her charitable and pious foundation made her a well-loved figure in her time, a figure whose memory lives on as a recurring character in 1001 Nights. Zubida grew up in the Abbasid court of her grandfather Caliph al-Mansur. Legend tells that he chose her name Little Butterball to describe how she was the best part of the family, just like butter is the best product of milk. After marrying her cousin, Caliph Harun al-Rashid, she became a powerful political operator and generous patron in her own right. Her most famous endeavor was the improvement of a pilgrimage route leading from Iraq to Mecca, later called the Darb al-Zubida, or Zubida's Trail. This was an important charitable project towards which she directed extensive resources. She built herself a large and lavishly furnished palace in Baghdad in which she hosted her own intellectual debates, poetry recitations, and theological discussions. At the death of her husband, her son al-Amin succeeded him as caliph. A civil war soon erupted between al-Amin and his half-brother al-Mamun, with the latter gaining the upper hand and besieging Baghdad from August 812 to September 813. Zubida supported her son throughout the siege, moving away from her palace to remain with him in the Round City during the final stage of the fighting. In the end, al-Amin was captured and executed. She was quickly exiled from Baghdad, but came back to the city after a few years. Upon her death in 831, she was buried in what is described as an unremarkable funerary monument. It became a frequently visited spot for pilgrims about to start the Hajj and wishing to thank this most famous of Abbasid queens for her charitable works. Silk Roads. The German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen coined the expression Silk Road in 877 to designate the network of trade routes that connected Eurasia through antiquity and the Middle Ages. Though catchy and well-known, this expression is also misleading. There never existed one single road linking China and Europe. Almost no one traveled from one part of the continent to the other, and many goods other than silk were transported. Some geographical constraints, the Himalayas and Zagros Mountains, the Talcamacan Desert, dictated the use of some common itineraries, but changing weather conditions or political situations frequently forced travelers to alter their plans. The length of the 12,000-kilometer journey, 2-year journey, meant that few walked the entire route, giving rise to a host of middlemen who exchanged goods without traveling much more than 50 kilometers themselves. Baghdadi glasswork could therefore reach Korea without a Baghdadi merchant accompanying it. The overall impression was that of a global network connecting east-west as well as north-south, overland routes with Indian Ocean maritime routes. Baghdad, linked to the Indian Ocean by the Tigris River and located near the main valley crossing the Zagros Mountains into Iran, was ideally situated to take advantage of these routes. This was a fact well known to its founder, Caliph al-Mansur, who, according to 9th century historian al-Tabari, declared upon the creation of the city, "Here is the Tigris with nothing between us and China, and on it arrives everything that the sea can bring." Agriculture. The Umayyad and Abbasid periods corresponded with important advances in agriculture across the capital territories. They were facilitated by the size of the empire and the taxation system which favored irrigated lands. Even though this period has sometimes been called an agricultural revolution, it mostly took the form of an expansion, intensification, and spread of existing techniques. Pre-existing infrastructures such as Roman or Persian aqueducts, canals, and reservoirs were expanded and brought to previously arid lands. The use of agricultural devices such as water mills, animal-powered water lifts, sakia, and water screws, known across the Mediterranean but sparsely used until then, became widespread. Crops common in the eastern parts of the empire, such as sugarcane or bananas, were adapted to new environments from Egypt to Iberia and North Africa. The results were higher yields, larger cities, and plenty of citrus fruits. These developments went together with a consolidation of land ownership into the hands of the elite. Large-scale irrigation works were lucrative but costly and could only be paid for by the already wealthy landowners. The Abbasid period is therefore characterized by the expansion of huge estates to the detriment of smaller farmers, leading to widespread discontent. Seleucia on the Tigris. On the western bank of the Tigris, about 35 kilometers south of Baghdad, rises a small mound known as Tel Umar. Today beaten by winds and separated from the tumultuous course of the river by swamps, this hill once dominated one of the largest cities of antiquity, Seleucia on the Tigris. Seleucia was founded at the end of the 4th century BCE by Seleucus I, one of Alexander the Great's successors. Its position at the start of the main road leading from Iraq into Iran and at the start of the confluence of the Tigris and a canal linking it to the Euphrates enabled the city to control the movement of the caravan and armies during the 5 centuries of its history. This control let it flourish into a commercial hub and royal residence known throughout the ancient world for its Stoic philosophers and Olympic athletes. In time, the Seleucids' power waned. In 129 BCE, Seleucia was conquered by the Parthian Arsacids, a rival dynasty. The city's development nonetheless continued uninterrupted, until multiple attacks by Roman armies and a catastrophic change in the Tigris riverbed led to Seleucia's decline and disappearance around 200. In time, other imperial centers, Tesfion and then Baghdad, took advantage of the position that made it so important for so long and became world hubs themselves. Baghdad canals, starting, of course, with the Tigris and its tributary, the Diyala River. Added to these was a system of canals whose construction could be traced over a millennia, and which was restored and expanded by the Umayyads and Abbasids. Around the city, this network was incredibly dense and went from large, navigable canals to very narrow trenches. Some of the water was also provided by canals coming from the Euphrates to the west. This massive system fulfilled multiple needs. It provided the city with the water necessary for daily consumption, hygiene, a sewer system, etc. It played a crucial role in irrigating the cultivated lands from Baghdad, turning them into the breadbasket of the city and its growing suburbs. Linked by canals, the Tigris and Euphrates were also essential communication and trading routes of worldwide importance, used to bring goods and people from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean region. Finally, the water system could easily turn into a useful defensive feature when needed. Most of the bridges over Baghdad were in fact wooden pontoons which could be disconnected or even destroyed in case of attacks. This useful system came at a cost. Maintaining it was extremely labor-intensive, demanding ever-increasing efforts from a large number of free and enslaved workers.
افتح يا سمسم. That worked. Even the Banu Musa would be impressed. Now to find the King of Thieves.
The 1001 Nights. Drawing on rich tradition of India and Persian literature, the Arabic collection of folk tales 1001 Nights first appeared in 9th century Baghdad. Despite its name, it initially included about 200 stories which used the setting of the time, the great cities of Baghdad and Damascus, the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, or the life of the bazaar as a backdrop. At the center of the compilation is the famous frame story of Scheherazade, a brilliant woman who volunteers to marry the king Shahrayar after his first wife cheated on him and broke his heart. The king reacted by marrying a new woman every night and having her executed in the morning. so no one could be unfaithful to him again. To save her life, and that of the other women, each night Scheherazade tells the king of a portion of a story, always ending with a cliffhanger so the king will have to spare her life another night. These stories take many forms, from child fantasy, animal tales, or highly erotic poems. Some last only a few paragraphs, others dozens of pages. They cover many topics and touch on many themes, among them justice and the unjust treatment Shahryar has inflicted on his wives. The theme of women acting to save lives by telling stories was a popular one. Pictured here are scenes from the Sinbad-Nama, in which the women of the harem tell stories to save a young prince's life. The 1001 Nights was described with contempt by the 10th century bookseller Ibn al-Nadim, who considered its themes unfit for the cultivated audience. But his opinion was obviously not shared, as the compilation popularity throughout the Abbasid society helped it survive and spread to the entire empire and beyond. Storytellers and scribes from various cultures have added, subtracted, and altered individual stories ever since. Some of the most famous tales, Aladdin or Ali Baba, were even added as late as the 18th century. This long cross-cultural evolution helps explain the universal appeal of 1001 Nights. Death and afterlife. In time, rituals inspired by Prophet Muhammad's life started to coalesce into a distinctive Islamic burial rite practiced all over the empire. A unique element was a relatively short mourning period of only a few hours. In this small amount of time, the body was washed in houses or mosques an uneven number of times with perfumed water. Depending on the financial resources of the mourners, the deceased person was dressed with either a dedicated mourning shroud or a clean cloth, wrapped in an odd number of times with the best available cloth used for the head. Finally, the body was carried to a cemetery in a procession, bringing together family members, friends, and neighbors. They laid the deceased to rest on their side, facing Mecca and the eventual judgment of God. The prominence of odd numbers in these practices were related to their signifying the oneness of God in Islamic theology. Every one of these steps was linked to the perception of the afterlife. Those who passed away were believed to be awaiting a day of judgment, in which they would appear in the state in which they were buried. Then would be decided their eternal fate, either in Jannah, the final abode of the righteous, or heaven, or Jahannama, the place of punishment for evildoers, or hell. Of course, this view of death as transitional did not prevent feelings of sadness. Abbasid cemeteries were full of family members visiting their dead loved ones, offering poems, prayers, and small tokens of affection or memorabilia.
لديهم أوامر باستئصال المتمردين ومثيري الاضطرابات، لكنهم لم يجدوا أيا منهم، فقرروا معاقبة أي شخص عشوائيا وحسب. إنه أمر مقلق. من المقرر أن ترتفع الضرائب أيضا. زادت ضريبة كشك الضعف تقريبا. لست متأكدة.